Dad's always tinkering with hammers and nails, Jessica said, her voice dripping with contempt. Honestly, I'm embarrassed when my friends ask what you do. You are not like my father, a man of standing. Marcus kept his head buried in his phone. His silence cut deeper than his wife's words. I spent my life building everything for him, and now I'd become the shame. Anger flared, hot and sharp. I set my glass down so hard it cracked. Oh, is that so? I said, my voice cold as ice. The next week, when the bank comes to foreclose on this house because your man of standing forgot to pay the mortgage, go ahead, tell them whether standing can put a roof over your head. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking, like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? Sunday dinner at our house ran on an unspoken rhythm, familiar as the tick of the old grandfather clock my wife Mary had loved. Marcus would show up, followed by Jessica, who'd be carrying a bottle of wine that I knew had been grabbed on the way from the Trader Joe's down the road. We'd talk about their work in the city, about interest rates, about marketing campaigns I didn't understand a lick of, and I, Arthur Fitzgerald, 72 years old, would listen, nodding, feeling the quiet pride of a craftsman who set down his hammer. I had built my life, and now I was watching the harvest. That Sunday evening was no different. The filet had been grilled to perfection. A bottle of red had been opened. Marcus was telling some deal story while Jessica looked at me with that bright, calculating gaze of a professional marketer sizing up a potential client. Then I decided it was time. I set my fork down. The sound of the tine against the china rang out in the sudden hush. I've got a few things I want to say about your wedding present, I started. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. Jessica leaned forward. Her smile clicked on like a switch. First, I said, looking right at Jessica, I'm going to pay off the rest of your student loans. The air thickened. I watched her do the math in her head, 50 grand. The number floated between us. And second, I went on, turning to Marcus, I'm going to remodel your whole basement, build you an oak bar, an in-wall entertainment system, hardwood floors, a proper space for you to raise a family. The silence shattered. Jessica sprang out of her chair and threw her arms around me. I signed the $50,000 check and felt the weight of my signature like a heavy beam I'd hoisted in my younger days. When she hugged me, the scent of her perfume, sharp and expensive, seemed designed to mask the smell of sawdust and honest labor on my clothes. You're a lifesaver, she said. That dad sounded like a title she was trying on, not one she felt. Marcus hugged me too. His embrace was truer, though a little feeble, as if he were surprised by his own father's generosity. Jessica's laughter that night in my house was a touch too loud, too polished. It didn't fill the room. It ricocheted off the walls, hunting for an audience. My wife's laugh used to sink into the grain of the wood. Over the following weeks, their basement became my kingdom. The smell of damp concrete and fresh-cut lumber became my perfume. I worked from dawn to dusk, the loose hands of a retired man finding purpose again. I wasn't just building a basement. I was crafting a legacy, a statement in wood and mortar that the Fitzgerald family stood firm. Jessica would bring me coffee in the mornings. She'd stand there, arms folded, admiring my work. You're incredible, Dad. Marcus is so lucky to have a father who can do everything, she'd say. I'd nod, feeling a warm satisfaction. Then the first crack appeared. One morning, just after she set down her coffee, Jessica's phone rang. She stepped a few paces away, turning her back to me, assuming the buzz of my saw would drown out the call. But I shut the saw off to change the blade. I heard everything plainly. Yeah, the basement's coming along, she said to whoever was on the line, her tone stripped of that earlier admiration, edged now with impatience. A little slow, but it's free, after all. The second crack showed up that weekend, when a few of Marcus's buddies came by to inspect the progress. I was up on a ladder, wiring the recess lights, sweat running down my face. Marcus clapped a friend on the shoulder, pointed down into the basement taking shape, and said with easy pride, my dad's been helping out. Helping out? I thought, my hands still tightening a screw overhead. Helping out my whole two hands, my back, and my battered knees, too, son. The sacrifice of my life reduced to a casual weekend favor by a bunch of kids. I tried to let those little slides slide. I told myself it was just the way young people talked, that I was being oversensitive. I kept working, turning that damp, awkward space into something beautiful in wood and stone. I finished 2 days ahead of schedule. I cleaned up, gave the oak bar one last polish, and felt a full, deep pride. I decided to drive over and surprise them. I parked across the street, not wanting the engine noise to ruin the reveal. As I approached the front door, I heard Jessica on the video call through the open living room window. Her voice carried clear in the still afternoon. Gone was the earlier admiring tone. This one was sharp and calculated. "Can you believe it, Chloe?" she said. "He finally finished. Now we can start planning the housewarming, make it a big event, invite all the right people." I froze, hidden behind the rhododendrons Mary had planted. "Of course he'll do the logistics," Jessica went on, as if stating the obvious. "Cleaning up, arranging chairs, running the bar, keep him busy. He likes feeling useful, keeps him from dwelling on being alone. Aid in the servant ingression." Each word drilled into me like a tiny bit. I wasn't a father or a grandfather in their eyes. I was unpaid logistics, help a cure for my own loneliness. Chloe said something I couldn't quite make out. Jessica's reply landed like a thunderclap. "And what about the money?" she sneered, dry as a bone. "I told Marcus your dad's got decent savings. We need an investment for the kid's future." She paused, then delivered the killer line. Marcus would talk to him. Old men melt for words like legacy and family. I stumbled back without meaning to, my foot catching on the paving stone. I made no noise. Inside, the family's staged happiness went on playing on the laptop screen. Outside, for the single audience of one, the curtain had fallen. It wasn't just the phrase "happy savings." It was the way she said it, calm, clinical, like discussing a quarterly strategy. A lifetime of my work, my legacy, was trimmed down to a line item on her spreadsheet. The crack was no longer in the wall. It ran straight through my chest. I turned and walked silently to my car. Hands that were steady with any tool trembled as I gripped the handle. I've built hundreds of houses in my life, but that night I realized the one I had poured the most into my own family sat on rotten foundations. And any good builder knows, when the foundation's gone, you don't patch it up. You tear it down and rebuild from scratch. I didn't sleep that night. A builder knows anger is a poor building material. It cracks under pressure. My anger wasn't hot, it was cold and precise. The next morning, instead of going over to their place, I went to my garage. That space, smelling of oil and metal, is where I think clearest. I didn't smash anything. I took out the old leather notebook and the drafting pencil. Like every project I've ever undertaken, I began with a plan. Define the problem. The foundation of respect has been violated. Goal: a controlled demolition of their pride, followed by a compulsory reconstruction of character. Materials: truth, the law, and their own greed. I sketched 4 main pillars: finance, logistics, legacy, and social reputation. Each pillar props up their illusion, and I will pull them down one by one. My silence in the days that followed was not empty. It was structural. Every hour I didn't call was another steel beam welded into place in my new design. They thought I was hurt. I wasn't hurt. I was building. A few days later, Marcus stopped by. He looked a little anxious, probably because of my unusual quiet. He wandered around the garage, kicking an old tire. I decided it was time for the first test. "Hey," I said, wiping a wrench. "Your dad's roof looks like it needs some work. A few leaks after that last storm. Gonna cost a pretty penny." I looked at my son. I gave him a chance to say, "I'll take care of it, Dad." Or, "Is there anything I can do?" Marcus went awkward. He avoided my eyes. "Oh, well," he said, voice a little too high. "Work's been tight lately. You know, with the new house and everything. Money's a bit tight." I nodded and set the wrench down slowly. The clink of metal on concrete sounded loud in the quiet. I had my answer. The problem wasn't only Jessica. It was here, in the shape of the sun I raised. Just then, Jessica came in a fake ray of sunshine in a summer dress, carrying a basket of pastries. "Dad," she chirped, "I brought you some blueberry muffins." She set the basket down on my workbench. We're having a little get-together this weekend with some new neighbors, she said, to celebrate the basement. Could you do the barbecue for us? You are the best at that stuff. Marcus, relieved, rushed to agree. Yeah, Dad, that'd be great. I looked at them both. Jessica grinned bright. Marcus looked at me pleadingly. They were a team, a perfect team, and I was the sponsor and the caterer. I smiled back, the practiced smile I've used my whole contracting life, the one you give a picky client. Of course, I said. I'd be glad to. On Monday, I didn't go to their basement. I went downtown. First stop was Mr. Miller, my attorney of 30 years. I didn't tell him a story. I gave him instructions. I wanted to amend my will and set up an irrevocable trust for my entire estate. You sure, Arthur? Miller asked, eyes old behind thick lenses. Certain, I said. I'm not disinheriting Marcus. I just want to make sure the boy actually grows up before he gets it. We drafted the terms. Any distribution over $10,000 would require unanimous approval of a 3-person board. Me, Miller, and one other. I already knew exactly who that third person would be. From the lawyer's office, I went to my financial manager. I instructed him to rework my portfolio, move everything into less liquid assets, harder to reach. I was building a wall around my legacy brick by brick. My last call of the day was to the Museum of American Craft and Design. I've been a long-time donor. I spoke to the curator. Ma'am, I said, I have my late wife Mary Fitzgerald's carving tools and a few of her pieces. I'd like to donate them to the museum's collection. And there was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by effusive thanks. I had intended to leave all of that to Marcus. Mary had always wanted him to have something to remember her by. But I realized a memory only matters if it's cherished. Otherwise, it's just old things gathering dust. Driving home, I felt a cold kind of peace. The pillars were set. The foundation for my plan was in place. Now I only waited for the BBQ, for the stage to be set. I got there early on Saturday. I wasn't just there to mend the grill, I came as a contractor inspecting the work. I brought my own stainless steel barbecue kit, the set I'd made years ago, and a small carved wooden box, ornate and fragile looking. Jessica met me at the door. Her smile seemed a touch tighter than usual. Maybe the residue of those awkward silences was still hanging in the air. As the neighbors began to arrive, the little show started. Of course, everyone wanted a tour of the great project in the basement. Marcus and Jessica led the procession, proudly pointing as if they'd driven every nail themselves. I stayed on the patio, calmly setting up the grill. I could hear the awed murmurs drifting up the steps. Then Bob, the retired engineer next door, came up with Marcus at his elbow. Arthur, old friend, Bob said, giving me a clap on the shoulder. That bar down there a real piece of work. He turned to Marcus. What kind of wood did you use for that bar? Looks solid. I see. I watched Marcus hesitate for a second. His eyes darted around, searching for an answer in the air. He floundered. Just good wood, I guess? I was flipping a rack of ribs and didn't turn, answering as if commenting on the weather. That's Appalachian red oak, Bob. Charred and sealed using the Japanese yakisugi technique. It'll outlast the house. A chorus of impressed ohs and ahs rippled through the man. I glanced over my shoulder. Marcus had his head down, face a little flushed. Jessica tried to change the subject. Mrs. Gable from next door raised an eyebrow. Another tiny crack had appeared in the perfect wall they had been hiding behind. Later, once everyone sat down with beers and plates, the talk drifted to the home's interior. Bob's wife Susan noticed the little wooden box I'd set on the table. Oh, Arthur, that box is beautiful, she said. That was my cue. The stage was set. I smiled a real smile, shaded with sorrow, and opened the box carefully. Nestled on red velvet were Mary's carving tools, chisels and gouges, each burnished and immaculate. My wife Mary was a remarkable craftswoman, I said, my voice dropping. She made this box and these tools with her own hands. I intended to pass them down to the family. I could feel every eye move from me to Marcus and Jessica. Jessica, desperate to score points, hurried in with a practiced earnestness. Oh, yes, we'll take great care of it, Dad. It's priceless. I looked at her, then around the table at neighbors and old friends who know my family for years. Actually, I said slowly, I've decided to donate these to the Museum of American Craft and Design, along with some of her other pieces. The silence that followed was heavy and humid, like the air right before a storm. You could hear eyes clink in someone's glass from across the yard. Jessica's smile was still plastered on her face, but it had frozen. It was the residue of a moment that had died. I went on, my tone even. I think they'll be better appreciated there. Her work will be seen and valued. No one spoke. Suddenly, everyone's shoes got interesting. Marcus looked like he wished the ground would open up. The charade of a grateful, legacy-minded family had been stripped away in the most public way imaginable. I hadn't accused them with a raised voice or dramatic flourish. I simply judged them unfit, and did it in front of the community that mattered to them. The party broke up earlier than planned. The air grew awkward. As I packed up to leave, I went over and shook Marcus' hand. My son didn't dare meet my eyes. I leaned close enough so Bob and a couple of others could hear and said, "Make sure you go over the renovation contract details again. Sometimes the smallest clauses are the most important." It was fatherly advice. It was also a warning. I drove home in silence. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a cold satisfaction. The first domino had fallen. I knew they wouldn't let it lie. Public humiliation makes people desperate, and desperate creatures rarely act wisely. I was ready for their next move. The call came on Tuesday evening. I'd been expecting it. The silence after the barbecue wasn't remorse, it was regrouping. "Dad." Marcus' voice on the line tried for that professional cadence he uses with clients. "We've got a few ideas we'd like to run by you. Something important. Could you come over?" I knew exactly what was coming. "Fine," I said. "I'll be there." When I arrived, their dining table had been staged like a conference room. Jessica sat ready at a laptop, hair pulled tight into a neat bun. Marcus opposite her looked wound tight as a spring. They invited me into the head chair. The board was set. They'd misread the argument. They thought the dispute would be about the vacation house. They were wrong. The issue was the signature I'd calmly removed from his loan application that morning. The vacation house was only the first domino. Jessica started the pitch. She is good at the slick slides, charts, and growth projections that flowed like water. It was an investment opportunity, some green tech startup, a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and they needed me. Specifically, they needed my signature to guarantee a $250,000 business loan. She peppered the presentation with phrases she thought would soften me: the family legacy, the kids' future, building something sustainable. Marcus nodded along like a well-trained marionette. I listened without interrupting. I took their glossy business plan, flipped through it deliberately. They thought the debate was over numbers. They were wrong again. The dispute was about a signature I'd placed on a different document days earlier in the quiet of my lawyer's office. Their business plan was not a proposal, it was a postmortem. When Jessica finished, she looked at me, countenance full of expectation. Marcus held his breath. The silence stretched. Finally, I set the plan on the table. "This looks interesting," I said evenly, "but there are a few issues." I watched a flicker of annoyance pass across Jessica's face. "First," I continued, "your projected marketing costs are very high. And from a couple of old friends in the construction trade, I hear this company has had a lawsuit about misleading claims regarding their product's energy efficiency." Jessica's color shifted. "Second," I said, "the co-founder, this guy Dave, he's got a shaky credit history. Some bad debts, a personal bankruptcy 5 years ago. Not exactly a dependable partner for a major loan." Jessica's confidence began to crack. Marcus glanced between her and me, confused. "But the biggest problem is," I said, and this was where I made my move. I reached into my old leather briefcase, pulled out a neatly bound packet, and pushed it across the polished table. All my assets were placed into an irrevocable trust last week. I paused, letting it settle into the room. As you can see on page 4, section 3, subsection B, I said, any expenditure over $10,000 requires the approval of a 3-person board. Me, my attorney, Mr. Miller, and an old friend of mine, David Harris. I looked them both square in the eye. Would you like to present this plan to them? The silence that followed was heavier than concrete. Marcus's mouth hung open, speechless. Jessica's carefully applied mask went white and cracked. "Dad, what have you done?" she stammered. No longer the confident marketing exec, but a child caught in the act. I rose slowly, smoothing my jacket. I didn't feel anger. I felt a cold release. I'm protecting my legacy, I said, like any prudent investor would. I didn't wait for their reply. I turned and walked out the door, leaving them stranded among their colorful infographics and the future that had just imploded. I'd won an important skirmish, but I knew the war wasn't over. Desperation is a dangerous enemy, and they now were very, very desperate. After that disastrous meeting, I thought they'd need time to digest the blow. I was wrong. Desperation doesn't need time, it needs action. However foolish. I was in the garage, my refuge. After days of tension, I found peace in putting familiar things in order. I opened an old wooden chest where Mary kept photo albums. My fingers skimmed over faded pictures. Marcus as a blonde kid, proudly holding the first base he'd caught. Mary laughing, her eyes flashing in the sunlight. I paused at a shot of her teaching Marcus how to hold a hammer, his little hand wrapped in his mother's gentle one. She used to say, "A man ought to know how to make things with his own hands, Arthur. Not to save money, but to understand the value of work." Lost in memory, the phone rang. It was Marcus. I took a breath, braced for another storm. What came instead wasn't anger. "Dad?" Marcus' voice broke on the line. Gone was the fake professionalism. Gone the posturing. Only naked desperation. I don't know what to do. Something in me, the father part, tightened. "Dad," he choked on the next words, "that investment. It's everything we had. Jessica put it all in. Now we could lose everything. The house, everything. That's it." His voice over the phone was drenched in a fact he was clearly performing. I could almost hear Jessica behind him, prompting, tugging at his words like strings. He was a puppet playing a tragedy he hadn't written. "Jessica's falling apart, Dad. I've never seen her like this. She can't stop crying." I let silence stretch out. Then he struck. "I remember Mom," Marcus said, a whisper almost. "She would know what to do. She'd never want to see us like this. She'd want you to help us to build a future for the family." A clean, cold flash of anger cut through my pain. They had crossed the line. They walked into sacred ground with filthy feet. They dared to use Mary's memory, the love she'd given, her integrity as a cheap instrument of emotional blackmail. I heard a soft breath, not Marcus's, close to the phone. Jessica. She was there, listening, directing this cowardly theater. I inhaled, kept my voice perfectly calm. "Stop," I said. My voice was small, but it carried the quiet before a fault line snaps. Silence on the other end. "Marcus, listen to me," I said, each word deliberate. "Your mother was a woman of honor. She taught you right from wrong before you could read. She would never approve of you using her name to lie to your father. I let that land. She would be ashamed of you today." I heard a choked sound. This time I believed it might be real. "The trust is still there. The board is still in place." I continued, my voice stripped of feeling. "When you've learned to be the man your mother raised, come to them. Until then, do not call me about this again." I hung up before he could answer. I set the phone on the workbench. The garage's silence felt heavy. I had stood firm. I had protected my legacy and Mary's. But the victory brought no joy. It left a wound. The bond between me and my only son lay in pieces. I'm not sure there's any glue on earth that can put it back together. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you and where are you listening? The silence in my house after that last call was anything but peaceful. It was loud. It was full of the ghosts of conversations that should have happened, the echoes of respect that was never given. Victory felt a lot like loneliness. In the days that followed, I tried to return to routine. I spent hours in the garage, trying to find focus again in planing a piece of wood or snugging a bolt. But the work no longer brought joy. Every tool I picked up reminded me of Marcus, of the afternoons I taught him to tell oak from pine. One evening, I opened Mary's old trunk. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just wanted to touch the things she touched. A leather-bound photo album fell out. I sat on a rickety stool and turned the pages. There was Marcus at 6, blonde hair, grin wide as he held aloft the wooden model airplane we'd built together. Mary stood beside him with a hand on his shoulder, pride shining in her eyes. She always believed that teaching a child to make something with his own hands teaches patience, integrity, and the worth of honest labor. My pain wasn't about money. It was about those values being sold off so cheaply. On Saturday, I went to the hardware store downtown for a few odds and ends. While I was looking at wood glue, a familiar voice called out, "Arthur?" It was Bob, the neighbor and retired engineer. "Hey, Bob," I said. He glanced at me, then at my basket. The air between us went a little awkward. "Arthur," he began. "That party." It was tense. I shrugged and kept examining a tube of glue. Bob stood there a moment, then his voice softened. "I just wanted to say, my wife and I, we understand. Kids these days sometimes forget what really matters." I stopped. I looked at Bob. He's a quiet man, like me. His words carried weight. "And about you donating Mary's tools," he said, sincerity in his eyes. That was the right thing to do. Talent like that deserves to be honored. We didn't talk glue after that, and we both knew why. That short conversation among aisles of screws and hinges was all I needed. I realized I wasn't alone in this fight. My decision wasn't merely the pride of an old man. It was about protecting the values a whole generation guys like me and Bob had believed in. When I got home, there was a new email in my inbox from Marcus. Subject line, "Can we talk?" I opened it. My heart gave a little skip. The email was brief. "Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Jessica too. We've been talking a lot. We really want to make things right. Could we come over and talk?" I read it 3 times. Every word, every punctuation mark, the wording sounded contrite. But something was off. This voice was too formal, too polished. It lacked the messy, broken quality of a real apology. "We really want to make things right." That line wasn't Marcus's. Marcus would have said, "I screwed things up." This phrasing is Jessica's, I thought. She'd written it, or at least she coached him through it. They hadn't given up. They were only changing tactics. The next storm was forming, and this one would wear the face of remorse. They invited me to sit in the front row. I sat for a long time, staring at the screen. Fine, I thought. If they wanted to perform, I'd be the audience. But I'd bring my own script. They came that Thursday afternoon. Both wore simple, neutral-colored clothes, as if they were attending a memorial. Jessica's makeup was subdued for once, and her eyes were a little puffy. A perfect little performance. I invited them into the living room, where the late afternoon light slanted through the windows and set the dust motes drifting in the air aglow. I settled into my usual armchair. They took the sofa across from me, leaving a small space between them. Marcus cleared his throat. Jessica nudged him lightly. The actors were in position. "Dad," Marcus began, voice steady and mechanical, not looking at me but at an unfocused point on the rug. We've been doing a lot of thinking these past few days, and we realize we've been thoughtless. We didn't appreciate everything you've done. We're sorry." The words came out too smooth. No hesitation, no shards of real feeling. It was a rehearsed speech. I nodded quietly, motioning for him to go on. Seeing that my reaction wasn't the one they expected, Jessica began her part. She bowed her head, shoulders trembling faintly. "We've been so focused on the future that we forgot what matters most to family. We just want to heal this wound, Dad." That was my cue to take the stage. I leaned forward and put on the kindly, slightly befuddled look of an old man. "Oh, don't say that," I said, warm. "I know you didn't mean any of it. Work pressures, that's all. Young people, they get caught up." A flicker of relief crossed their faces. They thought a goal had taken the bait. "I'm glad you see that," I continued, genuinely seeming moved. "In fact, I've been thinking a lot too. I brought some papers so we can settle this properly." I reached for a sky blue folder on the small table beside me. Jessica and Marcus' eyes lit up. They were certain it contained trust documents, a concession, a victory. I agreed completely. I echoed Jessica's words. "We need to heal as a family." I opened the folder. "Here," I said, sliding a sheet toward them, "is the official letter of apology I've drafted to the museum board explaining that there was a misunderstanding and that our family holds Mary's legacy in the highest regard." I thought this would help restore the family's standing in the community. Jessica's smile froze. And here, I pushed out another page, is a commitment to weekly family financial counseling. I found a very capable counselor downtown. I think we need an outside professional to help us communicate about money and legacy. Jessica and Marcus went silent. This was nothing like what they had rehearsed. The play had gone off script. Financial counseling? Jessica stammered. The word healing now sounded like a curse. Yes, I said, keeping my face gentle, to make sure the family legacy is stewarded responsibly. I've prepaid a year. It's costly, but for the sake of the family's healing, I thought it was worth it. Our first session is Saturday at 9 a.m. I've signed all three of us up. I produced a plain ballpoint pen from my jacket pocket and set it neatly between the two papers. Their eyes fell to it. It beamed in the slanting light like something small and insignificant until, in that moment, it felt as heavy as a judge's gavel. Silence filled the room. Jessica stared at the commitment form like it was a snake. Marcus looked as if he might be sick. Their refusal to pick up the pen was a confession louder than any words. The performance was over. The director had lost control. I hadn't outed them with accusations. I had simply required them to live by the lies they'd been practicing. And for people like them, that was the cruelest punishment of all. A father's anger when his child is put in harm's way is a different sort of energy. It isn't hot or loud. It's cold, focused, and purposeful. Driving home after hearing that naked truth, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a heavy urgency. I've spent my life building things that hold up, protecting my family from storms. Now the storm was coming from inside the house I'd helped raise. The first thing I did Monday morning wasn't call Marcus. I called Dan Holloway. Dan's a private detective, a former cop I know from municipal jobs quiet. Gets to the point, sees what others don't. I didn't need to explain much. Dan, it's Arthur, I said. I need you to look into a few things, discreetly. I gave him Jessica Fitzgerald's name, the business partner I'd have heard about, and a few other details. I told him I wanted everything, financial history, associations, any debts. I need facts, Dan, I said. Not rumors, numbers, and documents we can lay on the table. I understand, Arthur, Dan said. Give me 72 hours. Those 72 hours, I lived in a strange, narrowed focus. I kept my hands busy in the garage with small projects, but my head was assembling a different plan, a plan for demolition. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. Revenge is emotion. This was surgery, excising a malignant thing from my son's life. On Thursday afternoon, a plain brown envelope appeared on my doorstep. Inside was Dan's report. I sat at the kitchen table Mary and I had eaten at for thousands of meals and read it. The truth was worse than I'd feared. The business partner was a con man who disappeared. The so-called green tech startup didn't exist. Jessica, my clever, sharp daughter-in-law, was buried in debt. Not business debt, online gambling debt. The numbers were staggering enough to drown a family. Dan's packet included statements and screenshots from betting sites. He'd even documented jewelry and wedding gifts quietly taken to pawn shops around town. I set the folder down. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact, cold and hard as marble. Her whole story, her ambitions, the supposed love she had for my son, they evaporated under the fluorescent light of the kitchen. I knew what I had to do. The final move was ready. I called Marcus first. I need to see both of you, I said, my voice steady. We need to finalize the trust terms. Come to my lawyer Miller's office at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I heard a flicker of hope in Marcus' voice. Yes, we'll be there. Quite idly. Then I called David Harris, the old friend who served on the board with me. David, I need you there tomorrow. The curtain's coming down. The next morning, Miller's office felt more like a boardroom than a family meeting. A lofted room with oak paneling, a heavy conference table, serious light pouring through the windows. David was there in a neat suit, looking more like a banker than a shop owner. Miller sat at the head of the table, professional and unreadable. Marcus and Jessica arrived. Jessica wore her confident business face, still convinced this was a negotiation she could salvage. Marcus looked hollow, like a man walking into a courtroom. I asked them to sit. There were no pleasantries. Thanks for coming, I began, my voice echoing in the room's silence. As I said, We're here to discuss the future of the trust. I saw Jessica lean forward, ready for an intellectual spar. However, I continued. Before we can talk about the future, the board needs to review the current financial condition of the beneficiaries. It's standard procedure. I didn't look at them. Calmly, I opened my leather briefcase, pulled out Dan Holloway's brown folder, and set it squarely in the middle of the table. The folder's slap on wood made a dry, decisive sound. "What is this?" Marcus asked, panic in his voice. I didn't answer. I opened the folder slowly. "Mr. Miller," I said, "please read the first item aloud." Miller put on his glasses, took the first sheet. "Personal financial report, Jessica Fitzgerald." He read in his flat, steady tone. "Total outstanding debt on online wagering platforms, $312,450.27. Jessica flinched as if struck. Marcus turned to her, his face draining with confusion and horror. "Gambling? You told me those were investments." I motioned for Miller to go on. He turned the page to screenshots. List of losing transactions, June through September. "Stop!" Jessica shouted, the sound raw. "You have no right. This is private." "Miss Fitzgerald," Miller said without looking up, "when you are a potential beneficiary of a trust, your financial circumstances are relevant. It's the law." David Harris, who'd been silent until then, spoke up with a hard, steady voice. "We are simply doing our duty, protecting the trust assets." I let silence stretch and let the weight of truth crush them. Marcus looked like he would faint. He glanced from his wife to me, and in his eyes I saw dawning horror and the truth being exposed. I turned to the next section of the folder. There were photos of jewelry, the necklace his mother had given me, the gold cufflinks sitting on a pawnshop counter. "The trust exists to build a legacy, Jessica," I said, finally looking at her, "not to bankroll an addiction." She had no reply. The mask had shattered. What remained was naked fear and shame. Then I turned to Marcus. For the first time in the meeting, my voice softened with a trace of hurt. "The trust was set up to protect the family legacy, Marcus, not to pay off gambling debts." I reached for 2 documents Miller had prepared and placed them beside Dan's folder. "I can't decide for you," I said quietly. I slid the 2 pens across the table. Option 1 is a prepared petition for divorce, drawn up on grounds of financial deception. The paperwork is ready. You lose the house, but you'll be free of the debt. You have a fresh start. I let him look at the first page. Option 2, I continued, tapping the second packet, is a joint bankruptcy filing. As a married couple, you'd assume the debt together. The trust cannot be used. You lose everything and it takes years to rebuild, but you do it together. I looked Marcus in the eye. You're a grown man, Marcus. The choice is yours. Silence filled the room. Jessica began to sob, not the rehearsed kind, but the broken sound of collapse. Marcus stared at the papers, his face blank. Then, slowly, he looked up and met my gaze. For the first time in years, I didn't see calculation or weakness in his eyes. I saw painful understanding. He understood everything. I hadn't issued an ultimatum. I'd returned to him the life he'd have to live. Now he had to choose how to live it. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking. Like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? He didn't choose right away in that stifling conference room. Time seemed to thicken. I watched my son stare at the 2 stacks of papers, his face a blank mask. I couldn't read his thoughts. Maybe he was replaying the marriage in his head, searching for a truthful moment among the rehearsed lies. Maybe, for the first time, he was truly seeing the cost of his weakness. Finally, with a hand that trembled, I'd never seen it shake like that. Since he first learned to ride a bike, he pushed the joint bankruptcy packet aside and slid the divorce papers toward himself. Jessica let out a choked sob, the sound of final collapse. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the deep, heavy sorrow of a builder who's had to take apart a portion of his own work. The months after were a gray, quiet blur. Jessica, true to form, vanished. No farewell, no argument. She simply packed and left, leaving behind a house full of expensive furnishings and empty promises. Rumor had it, via David's contacts, that she'd headed west to hunt for a new investor. I didn't care. She was a chapter I never wanted to reread. For Marcus, The consequences were concrete. He had to sell the house, the very house into which I'd poured sweat, blood, and love, down to the bones of the basement. The rush sale and the financial fallout Jessica left behind wiped out nearly everything he'd built. He moved to a rental apartment across town, a beige brick box full of identical balconies. He lost his wife, his home, his polished, successful facade. He hit bottom. I kept my distance. This was not punishment. It was respect. Respect for his pain and for the work he had to do himself. A father's love sometimes shows best in absence, in giving his child the space to get back on his feet. I called once a week short calls. You doing all right, son? I'm fine, Dad. We didn't talk about what had happened. It wasn't time. Then, one Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after that fateful day in the lawyer's office, there was a hesitant knock-no doorbell, just a polite rap. Marcus stood on the threshold. He looked thinner, a few new lines at the corners of his eyes, but something in his face had changed. The panic and confusion were gone. In their place, a tired steadiness. He didn't meet my eyes at first. He was looking down at my old work boots. Dad, he began, voice a little rough. I found an old table at a thrift store. One of the legs is broken. I want to fix it myself. Do you have clamps I could borrow? My chest tightened, not with pain, but with something else I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't begging. He wanted to borrow a tool. He wanted to build something, even if it was just a table with a broken leg. I said nothing. I nodded, stepped back to open the garage door wide, and pointed to the wall of tools where every hammer and saw had its place. Help yourself, I said. That was the first offer. From then on, Saturdays became ours. He'd show up around noon with coffee and donuts just like Mary used to bring. He wouldn't come into the house. He'd go straight to the garage. He started on the table, then a sagging chair, then a battered bookcase. At first, his movements were awkward. Slowly, off his hands grew accustomed to wood and metal. I kept busy on the other side of the garage. I didn't lecture. I let him learn by doing, let him fail, and find the fix. Occasionally, he'd ask, Dad, how do you cut a mortise so it fits snug? I'd move over and show him, not only with words but by placing my hand over his, guiding the saw along a true line. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Our conversation was in the rhythm of sandpaper whispering across old grain, the solid thud of a hammer finding its mark, the resinous smell of pine hanging in the air. We were sanding away the past layers of varnish, layers of deception, and making something new from the wreckage. One afternoon, while we were repairing an old armchair that had belonged to my grandfather, the one Mary used to love reading in Marcus, suddenly stopped. He was holding a piece of sandpaper, but his hand was frozen. I'm sorry, Dad, he said, voice rough, eyes fixed on the wood in his palm. There it was, the apology I'd both wanted and feared. I set the oil rack down, sat on the stool beside him, and looked straight into his face. He finally lifted his eyes. I didn't see self-pity. I didn't see a man performing or a boy seeking approval. I saw Marcus, my son, with all his complexity and mistakes. I didn't say, it's all right. Things were not all right. I didn't say, I forgive you. Forgiveness is not given as easily as that. Instead, my voice cracked too, and I said, I know. 2 simple words, carrying a world of meaning. An acknowledgement of both our wounds. An understanding of how weakness had led him astray. And an acceptance to move forward together. The past was closed. There was no digging it up again. Marcus nodded, a small, relieved motion, as if some invisible weight had shifted. He drew a long breath, and then, glancing toward the corner of the garage where the dark green 1967 Mustang still sat under a tarp, an emblem of a promise that had been broken, he asked, with a timid hint of hope, do you think someday we could fix that? For the first time in over a year, a real unforced smile crossed my face. Maybe, I said, but first we finish this chair. Foundation comes first. He smiled back real, too. We went on working. Late afternoon light poured through the garage door, turning dust motes to honey. No lofty vows, no glossy financial plans. Just 2 men, a piece of wood, and the deep understanding that we were rebuilding something far more important than a house. Weeks later, when the chair was finished solid, right, the look he gave me as he lifted a leg to check its balance was almost invisible, but it said everything. It said, "I'm sorry." It said, "Thank you." It said, "The foundation is steady now." Founder is a Braden. I nodded. Legacy isn't held in a trust or a classic car. It's here in the quiet between father and son, in the honest, simple labor of our hands. It's in the foundation of honor we're slowly, carefully rebuilding together. And this time, I knew it would outlast any structure I'd ever put up.